So with this, I want to open up to the committee and any other members for questions to the panel. Let's start with Mikhail.
Thank you very much. Well, congratulations for your great participations. I'm a true believer in the cooperation between agencies. I can say with evidence, and here we are sharing the room with the actors, with Analia, with Jarbas, with Lembit, that cooperation among agencies and maybe this cooperation through the regional authority has changed the future of our environments. And what happens is a positive effect. The effect is that we reduce transaction costs, and that happens to lower prices of the medicines because of pure cost of opportunity. When agencies are predictable, they lower transaction costs, and that makes the access to medicines wider. So I have been out of the environment since 2015. So my question is maybe for Jarbas and for everyone in the panel, which are the next steps for harmonizing? I remember that the confidence among some agencies in Latin America consisted in sharing reports of visits, or maybe we had huge confidence in FDA, for instance, in Mexico, because we rely on their authorizations of new molecules, and that generated huge benefits for Mexico, because we could have around 300 new molecules in around 4 years. We reduced the price of new molecules in Mexico around 50%, so that's very good. What's next steps? Maybe I think that the job that Peijo has done is absolutely great, because they aligned the countries. And what can be done in the future, in the near future, to harmonize more, to make this agenda more robust, and to send stronger messages, obviously, to the users of the agencies that are citizens and also the companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail. Here's what we're going to do. So we'll start with Dr. Barbosa. Two most important things, according to you, as next steps on the regional cooperation process, and then any other panel members. Once again, just one or two very important things that you believe need to happen.
Thank you, Mikhail, for this question. Mikhail was a very important, strong support of the cooperation during his term in COFEPRIS. Mikhail, frankly, I think that when the nations in the post-Second World War established many different international organizations, they forgot regulation. And now I think that only very recently that the WHO is playing a more important role. We have many different mechanisms. I think that the main is ICH, but how many countries are members of ICH? Small number. We have many regional platforms and mechanisms, but indeed I think that harmonization is, we need to increase the speed of harmonization, because I think that this is not only for the regulators, but also for the companies. I think that you mentioned the costs, Larry also mentioned. It's a very important cost to prepare 10 different dossiers to present to the 10 more important markets and so on. So I think that the first is standardization, more integration, more harmonization. Second is to establish a proper mechanism, specific mechanism to ensure reliance. As I mentioned, I think that the Larry also talked about that. Reliance in this case is a very specific process that the country needs to be. For example, it's licensed in the US, but it is proper for my temperature climate zone, for example, because it's different from a tropical country in the US. So it's not only to say that if licensed in the country A, I will give my license for. I think that this is not the best way to. But we can establish criteria and framework to enhance the trust and the reliance. I think that this is also very important because we cannot have the paradox. We are encouraging countries to strengthen their national health authority capacities. If we don't provide at the same time a mechanism to strengthen the harmonization, to strengthen reliance, we will fragment, more fragmentation in the process and more barriers to access, to rapid access.
Thank you. Any other panelists who wants to add something which has not been highlighted so far? Yes, Lisa.
I wanted to add two, well, maybe three small points that really work for us in the Caribbean. The success hasn't just been because CARPHA has a regional mandate and can produce regional guidelines and regional cooperation. But three things that really pushed our success is one, is advocating for political will. So we are dealing with over 20 countries, different political priorities. And for us, we have had to have two types of approach. We are working with at the level where they're implementing, but that's the persons who are implementing, the epidemiologists, the lab directors, and so on. But unless you don't have the political will of the Minister of Health and the Minister of Finance, who is going to give the money as well, now we're tourism dependent. Well, we've been tourism dependent to having the ministers of tourism. Unless you can't advocate and get their political commitment, it is not going to work as successfully. So this is the approach we have taken when it came to foodborne disease. We have gone to the Council of Health Ministers meeting, the Council of Tourism, or the Quoted meetings where we have been able to advocate. We have been able to show them empirical evidence like the burden of disease to say, okay, but you're losing so much money and so on. So getting that and to get their political will and then transfer that into policy. The other thing that has worked, and you mentioned it a little bit, but is that agency integration. So foodborne disease in the Caribbean, there are many agencies that are involved, AICA, FAO, PAHU, CARPHA, and the regional agencies and so on. And for it to work has been through agency integration so that countries are not bombarded with many different things. Having CARPHA working with all the different agencies to say, well, okay, these are the priorities, and we're working together to get it done, has been our success factor. And the final thing is incentives. The country want to be incentivized. Why am I doing this? How is it going to make me better? Am I going to be recognized for it? So linking what we're doing to global recognition has been important and making it a healthier, safer destination and so on.
So specifically for our region, the SADC region, there are certain things that we think we need to move on to. We have been under a lot of pressure to look at products, the life cycle approach to products. We have been resisting going into the area of pharmacovigilance because we think that's one of those things that perhaps we should for now do at national level. But the issue of variations is going to be critical because once the product is centrally approved, and then what happens? Who handles the variations thereafter? So it's something that we're going to have to look at. Anban also mentioned the issue, the difficulties that we have with labeling requirements. We have various labeling requirements within the region. So in the next 18 months, again, that's one of our things that we want to tackle to make sure that we can harmonize our labeling requirements. One of the things I like about attending meetings, it also gives me an opportunity to sit and reflect and think. So one of the crazy ideas that I have, which I'm going to take back to the region, is we do not, as countries, except for South Africa, have medical devices regulations. Why should we not start off at regional level right from the beginning, from the get-go? Because this to me would be a good basis, a good thing to cooperate on. Our 15 countries cannot each of them have a medical devices agency. That is not possible. But as a bloc, we could have something like that. So those are my thoughts.
Fantastic. Very, very quickly, because I think we have other questions from the committee.
And this is very, very blue sky, very much in the future. But it comes to everything that you all have just said, and it has to do with the concept of knowledge management. And if we really are moving towards these reliance mechanisms, I think it's important for the primary reviewers, the primary agencies, the companies, the people who develop the CPPs, et cetera, to be able to house that someplace that becomes accessible. And I could see in the future, many, many years from now, when my hair is all gray, that at that point, there will be all of this information, including what you mentioned, the pharmacovigilance, the post-authorization activities, the labeling changes, sitting up there. And when company A goes to country A, and country A has a harmonized requirement to see certain data, it switches on those elements that that country needs as part of its harmonized requirements, and it's right there. So it cuts down on these delays, and it also standardizes the approaches to what data people see, because we often hear agencies say, I didn't get to see the same data that the other agency saw. So this could remove that barrier. So that's just a very, very long-term aspiration.
John.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a really exciting panel. I think this whole
Microphone.
No, really exciting panel, and I think this whole flow of regional harmonization and the sort of right sizing of smaller countries and how you do that, it could be a real game changer in the field. Two questions. One is, given that, and there are always slower adopters and faster adopters and all, what do you have? Is it anybody doing an analysis of the impact of that in terms of, on the one hand, economics, because you're going to be reducing a lot of redundancy, and on the other hand, health, because you're going to, if you're getting newer products to market and all quicker, you're going to be getting some health impact there, so that you've got, again, that evidence for advocacy. So that's one question. The other is, and I guess this is more from Gugu, but actually, Lisa, anyone. The slow resistors and the early adopters, any observations about that dynamic and how long it takes to get everybody on board with something like this? When I say early adopters, resistors, the countries that are in early are slow to join.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we start with the second question, which is directed to Gugu, and then we'll ask other panelists, including Anban, for Jono's first question on economics and health benefits. Have we captured them?
Yes. I can only speak for Zanzibar. So yes, we started off as 4 countries, and we were supported largely by WHO in getting this, and I guess the model was the pre-qualification process. WHO also provides the quality oversight into the assessments so they provide that technical assistance. And very quickly it became clear that this is a successful initiative, that it works. And so we took it after about 8 sessions, we took it to the Ministers of Health of the SADC region to say this is what we're doing. The ministers decided to adopt it as a regional initiative. They then started asking each other, why are we not part of that thing? Because there were presentations all over the place that were showing how this was a successful initiative, because I think it was probably the first globally where countries got together and have this work sharing thing, aside from the WHO pre-qualification, which is pre-qualification, but this one leads to real regulatory decisions at home. So we found that everyone then became interested in the process. And I think we now have 7 active members who will participate actively in the process. The others have decided that they don't have sufficient regulatory capacity in their systems to actually be active members, but they all, aside from 2 or 3 countries, they all are non-active members. So we have 13 in total now in the whole initiative. Yeah, it's slow, but once you see the reason for it, if I can just touch on the economic thing, one of our consultants before did an assessment of how much it cost us. The assessment sessions are on a quarterly basis. Each country brings 2 assessors to the session. We then calculated how much, it costs to do that whole process. And per product, it was working out at around $4,000, which we thought was a very cost-effective process, given that it's going to go to 15 different or 16 different countries.
Thank you. Other panelists on Jonah's question, and have we captured the economic and the health benefits of regional cooperation wherever we've succeeded to some extent on it? Anyone who wants to start?
One way we'd have done that is through our burden of illness study, where in addition to showing burden, we also calculated the economic impact. And that grew a long way, and it is actually the reason we are moving towards regional food safety policy. So we were able to show, on a regional level in the Caribbean, 1 in 49 persons get sick. But if you were in a mass gathering like our carnival and so on, it was 1 in 11. But then that varied in countries depending on their economic as well as their infrastructure. So the poorer countries, it was much less, like 1 in 5 and 1 in 6. And we then put a dollar figure. What was the medical cost? What was the cost of staying home? What was the cost of, it was costing the country. So in some countries, it was like $40 million. That's somebody's entire budget in a country. And so that really made a big difference. And we actually admitted to saying, well, why we have not, and, we were able to say, well, look, it's going to cost you $20,000 or $30,000 to put into food safety, into lab and prevention and training. But this is the cost that's happening right now and you are giving out. And that made a difference. With respect to getting, reporting of illness from visitors for our tourism and base program, we were able to show what is the cost of economic cost of an outbreak. So, for instance, we had a recent outbreak in a country in 2012, one norovirus outbreak that started with 1 case. Within 5 days, we had 800 cases, and it resulted in a dramatic 30% decline in tourism, but a $17 million loss to one hotel. So when we show figures like that, of course, there's a big difference, and there's a reason for change here and policy.
Thank you. Once again, any other panelist wants to comment on this issue of the health and economic benefits of regional cooperation? So compared to doing it individually, doing it regionally, if that's been captured. And Anban, we cannot see you, so if you want to comment, you'll have to just speak up. Okay, if not, we'll move on to the next question. Lindra.
Okay, so I'm curious, and I really appreciate all that's been said. And as we're talking about harmonization, one of the things that I was curious about was the extent to which technology and innovation is assisting with harmonization. And I know that Larry mentioned sharing data, but I'm just curious, how have you been using technology, or how do you think technology might impact harmonization going forward?
Thanks, Lister. You want to start?
Yes. I will start with an example from the medical device side, let's say so. And it's important because I think that when we are talking about the harmonization, we are talking about the regional efforts to avoid duplication and so on. I think that we need to have a roadmap. We need to start with the most feasible things to establish consensus. For example, GMP inspections. GMP inspections is a nightmare for medical devices because in the medicine industry, we have a concentration of producers. But in medical devices, the development of new technology, some of the new medical devices, they have the same life cycle of a cell phone. So it's almost impossible, and many regulators try to use the same framework that we use to medicines, to medical devices, and it was a align a backlog of, I don't know, you need to wait 2-3 years sometimes to receive a GMP. Brazil, US, Canada, Japan, and Australia, they agreed to have a common mechanism to perform auditing process to release GMP. It's not the medical device single audit process. It is a mechanism. We have these countries. Paul is the executive secretary of this network, of this mechanism. They have around 13 or 14 now private third-party auditors that were accredited to this process. And now medical device producer receive one audit, and this report can be used by the 5 authorities. This was a big step, but now I am challenging them that you need to move forward. I think that because indeed it's not one audit report 5, because there are some difference between the 5 countries. Other countries are asking how we can participate of that. And for this process, we need a contribution from the 5 countries to establish. I think that's the first safe mechanism to exchange information, because this is very crucial when we are talking about dossiers for medicines or for medical device. So we now have it's REPS, the acronym, Regulatory Exchange Platform. It's a very high safety. The company that built that was the same that built the system for the FBI. So it's a very, and it's being less used than it should be. So we are also challenging the countries. We presented the PAHO, presented the WHO to ICMA, the Coalition of the Medicine Regulatory Authorities, for example, that it should be one solution for a very concrete barrier that we have now. When countries want to exchange the information about a dossier, sometimes they have legal problem to exchange. They don't trust the way that they are sharing that. So this is an example that the innovation in technology at the same time is a challenge for the regulators, but can provide some solutions.
Thank you, Dr. Barbosa. Any other examples of use of technology?
Yes, we have been fortunate, again, courtesy of WHO, in that they've provided us a portal on their MedNet platform. So when the assessment reports are done, they are posted by the assessor on the MedNet portal, and all the assessors have access to the portal. Only the assessors, of course, that are participating in the Zanzibar process have access to the portal, where they can then look at the document and then submit their also on report, so that by the time you come to the assessment session, people have had the chance to look at that. So that is how the technology is assisted us. Yeah.
So technology is key to when you're dealing with over 20 countries. So our communicable disease surveillance system, our laboratory-based surveillance system, and our new visitor-based surveillance system, they all computerized. So you get information almost instantly. And in each of these, there are thresholds. So, for instance, if gastro is going above a certain amount, the country is alerted, as well as CARPHA. So we at least will get that alert and know there's a problem, because obviously we can't monitor something 24 hours, but at least the alert will come. If it's gastro, it will come to me because I'm dealing with foodborne disease, and I can then be able to trace back. Or if it's respiratory illness, it will go to somebody else. So that is helpful. The visitor-based, because you need more rapid response, that is actually instant information flow. And that information flow actually not just goes to the Ministry of Health, it comes to CAF, and it also goes to the hotelier. It's all confidential, but the hotelier knows too that there's something wrong. So technologies make a big difference with our regional implementation.
Anban, Larry, anything to add to this? Anban? You may have lost him. Okay. Larry?
Yeah. Oh, I'm familiar with 2 processes. One has to do with understanding GMP requirements, and I sit within a large organization called Clarivate, And excuse me, Clarivate, through a grant through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is consolidating GMP requirements for many low and middle income countries. So that kind of a repository becomes very important, not only to countries to see what other countries are doing, but also for the product development partners to understand what the requirements are. So that's one way of using technology. And within CRS, we've been doing a program called OPERA, which stands for Optimizing Efficiencies in Regulatory Agencies. We started this several years ago because, as Gugu said, many organizations have started monitoring themselves, but there are many more that haven't. And so what we realized is that there was an opportunity to set up a secure system for countries to start putting in some basic metrics and to build in a culture of self-monitoring. That's really what it's all about. And then they can do some certain comparisons. But technologies like that, I think, will keep evolving and keep improving the situation.
Very interesting. Kenneth?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel, for a very nice discussion. My question centers on reliance. I think this is a good concept. Has anybody examined the legal liability of adopting a decision from another country, and in case the decision was not correct? Would there be some... It's a potential, but I'm delighted that there's a regulatory reliance concept being promoted, but just worried about this issue.
Gugu, you want to start?
Even when we thought we were doing full reviews, we actually were relying on other people. Because generally, when it comes to the clinical data side, certainly in our part of the world, we wouldn't have the capability of doing the kind of assessments that are done by EMA or by the FDA. So you then go to their assessment reports and rely on them. And sometimes, yes, down the path, there's a problem with a particular product. It's a risk that we all take. And it's not a risk that you can even avoid if you were to try and do your own assessment. So it's part of the risk, I think, of doing business. I know that a number of jurisdictions have incorporated the reliance concept into their legislation as well, just to protect the agency from that. But, yeah.
Larry?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point between the difference between reliance and recognition. And that's something that sometimes gets lost in the mix, where reliance is where an agency is informed by the decisions of another agency, whereas recognition is where they take the decision of another agency. And recognition does occur in certain countries for certain kinds of products, but that has to be built into legislation. So I agree with Gugu that with reliance mechanisms, there's kind of a fail-safe built into the second country's ability to use the first country's decision.
Thank you. We'll go to Raymond.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In fact, I wanted to know whether agreements reached at a regional level are incorporated in the national legislation so as to bring more commitment in the implementation of the agreement. Thank you.
Is there someone in particular you want to address this to, Raymond, or to the panel as a whole?
I think any person.
So the model law on medical products, the African Union model law, actually has a provision for incorporating that deals with the harmonization decisions and incorporation of these things. As I say, some jurisdictions, and I think it's in EAC, it's just they've been working on their legislations right now. They are trying to incorporate some of these basic requirements into their national legislation so they are not challenged.
I can add to that. So even though the Caribbean countries are individual countries, when it comes to policy and following good practices or best practices, they tend to operate like a region. So, for instance, in drafting the regional food safety policy, the countries then have taken that draft and then make it their own, mimic it for their national food safety policy. Same thing we are doing right now. We're drafting a regional policy for surveillance of visitor illnesses. They're using that to make national policies. So because of that regional mandate and because they're operating as a region, they tend to trust CAFA and trust the regional agencies that if there's a regional policy, a region mandate, they tend to follow. Of course, that goes with political will and commitment and advocacy for it.
Mikhail, you want to add something to the reliance and legal liability response? Okay. Yes, Lembit.
To add to the reliance issues, that we have to be mindful that the regulatory decisions are taken based on what you know at the time point of making decision. And of course, when the time passes on during the life cycle of the medicine, because nowadays it's the life cycle approach to you may have additional information coming in, which changes your benefit risk assessment. So it is, again, that if you do the reliances, that you can rely on what was at that time point, but what comes afterwards, of course, the reference authority may have, taken a change in the decision or deviation from the original decision. And in a way, it's pretty normal. And I think then if you have the reference authority, you usually then follow also the follow-up of the marketing authorization. And if there are restrictions or additions, you have to monitor it and you have to adopt it as well. So it's not, again, a one-off decision, but it's, again, that you have to put some efforts of follow-up. You can't just say, I tick the box now and I'm out of the business, and it's just not that. Second is, what I wanted to make a point is about all these initiatives of harmonization and working together, and here is only a couple of them, because there is also some which are out of radar screen because they are not very popular. It's also now in the European WHO region, there is a harmonization initiative, which is 5 countries, which is called the Eurasian Economic Union, which basically they want to create also harmonized regulation guidance documents for quality, safety, and efficacy. And they have, in a way, taken a lot from the European Union, but sometimes when you read it goes like European Union, and then it deviates, and then it comes back, But still, it's there, this initiative with 5 countries. And in the long-term run, they also want to have this, like, if one country accepts the product, then again, there are other countries, there is a mechanism created that they come along, that it's not duplicative efforts in all the 5 countries. And of course, in Asian region, there are also ASEAN initiatives that are actually, it's quite a task to map all the harmonization and cooperation activities ongoing. It's a task in its own right. Now, what I would like to say about Sasibona is that, which is for the committee maybe is a good thing, and it doesn't belong to the new technologies, it belongs to the very bad old technologies. And sometimes these do work, and because they are foolproof. It's the leadership. It's an old technology, leadership. Lack of leadership, you don't have anything. You have the leadership, you may have good things happening. And in case of Sasibona, I would point out the leadership provided by the heads of agencies. Because if you have the leadership of the agencies who are more proactive and try to develop something, things really do move, because it's from internally. It's their business, they feel the ownership, they move it. And I think they are a very good example of the leadership of the heads of agencies in Sasibona. In some other initiatives, I would say this leadership issue is not so good, So you have different initiatives with different quality of leadership, but the quality of leadership and ownership by the leaders, it's a very important factor. If you have it, things start to develop. Thank you.
Thanks, Lambert. One additional thing I'll add to your leadership comment is also stability of leadership, which we haven't seen in some regions. So that part. Any other questions from the committee? Yes, Julie.
Following up on harmonization of harmonization, and the point that it's hard to map everything that's happening. And I'm just wondering if there is any sort of effort in the food and drug area to sort of rationalize the movement towards harmonization? Is there any benefit in doing that? How would the committee really get a good grasp on exactly where all those efforts stand?
Yes, so I'll pose this to Gugu with a sort of sub-question that as you describe the three regions, SADC, East Africa, ECOWAS, and then you describe the African Medicines Agency, so how does this all fit? I mean, is this going to fit in an umbrella, and is that the way it will be done in the future?
So I indicated that on the African continent, it is the initiative is being run out of the NEPAD agency. So it is the NEPAD agency. There's a unit there, a team that drives all the regional economic activities. So if the committee wants any further information on the AMRH initiative, we can put you in touch with the leadership there, who can then give you a lot more information. The idea with the African Medicines Agency is that this initiative should grow into AMA. We don't want parallel processes. So if you look at the objectives, what AMA will be doing is going to be continuing the work of the initiative, but we wanted to institutionalize this because there are things we don't want to lose. We don't want, because the initiative is based on a project. So once the project comes to an end, we don't want the initiative to end. Therefore, it will be institutionalized, therefore, into the African Medicines Agency. And then it is that will drive the regional economic communities.
Thanks. Dr. Parvos?
Well, just to bring some example from the region of the Americas, I think that it's very important to remind that the PAHO is working with the national health regulatory authorities from 20 years at least, let's say so. And it was, I think, that's some very important step. First, we have this network to provide more harmonization. Pandra, that we have the meeting, the conference last year in El Salvador. It's very important because it's an interesting platform that the US and Canada and Brazil and Mexico and Colombia can share and can discuss together how we can provide more harmonization in a region that is very different. The markets are different, the national capacities are very different. The second is that the PAHO also has a tool to assess the national regulatory capacity. I think that we are talking that trust is not a subjective perception, but you need to know the process. You need to have to know that if the authority has autonomy, has a transparent process, it has evidence-based decisions and so on. So this assessment, I think that it provides, it's not only to say that if you are in a good or in a bad position, but the result, I think that the most important result is that the national health regulatory authorities know exactly the fields that they need to strengthen in order to improve their capacity. I think that this is also a very important step that we have reached in the region, and now we are part of the global discussion of the GBT, that will be a global benchmarking tool. But I think that this region was a kind of a pioneer in this field, and this experience is very important to have objective scientific instrument that the national health regulatory authorities can be assessed and can be clearly establish priorities when they need to improve their process.
Just very quickly, ICH has member countries, but many observer countries, and there's a requirement for those countries to have the ability to follow certain guidances. So we are working very closely with ICH. We've created a tool that's now being rolled out to both countries and companies to do self-evaluations with regard to how they're implementing those particular guidelines. There's a set of guidelines that they're focusing in on. So when you talk about harmonizing the harmonization, one is to try to understand the perceptions of those harmonizations, because you can get different perceptions based on the tools that you use. So, yeah.
Okay, with that, I want to close this panel. thank all our panelists. I think we learned a lot, and the committee has benefited tremendously from seeing the progress that we've made, clear opportunities to do more work in this area. With that, I pass it back to Catherine Wotecki. Thank you.
And I'd like to add my thanks not only to this panel, but to all of the speakers yesterday afternoon and all this morning and early this afternoon. Your thoughtful comments have provided us with a lot of questions to pursue, as well as a really good base of information from your experience and expertise. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for your participation. And we wish you also safe trips home. Some of you have come a long way, and we also appreciate the time that you have devoted to helping us. Do not be surprised if you hear through Jillian Buckley some follow-up questions. One of the tasks that we're going to be taking up in this next hour when we go into executive session are, what are the specific items that we'd like to follow up with you on? So again, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. We really have learned, and you undoubtedly will be hearing from us in the future. Thank you. Thanks much. And thank you all again.